Hey there, deep and wide thinker. Do you thrive on unraveling complex ideas and drawing unexpected connections across different books, various books? Or maybe you enjoy simplifying intricate concepts. If that sounds like you, I'm confident that you will find this video fascinating and helpful. Here's a quick sneak peek of what we will dive into today. Number one, my unique approach to tackling complex literature. In this case, what I study a lot of is the Bible, different types of literature inside of one book. We'll also go over the surprising benefits of taking strategic breaks during study sessions, how following your curiosity can unlock hidden links between your ideas, and then number four, the power of context, why Heptabase is your ultimate tool. And by the way, if you're brand new to Heptabase, or maybe you have heard about it and you've not actually tried it, and you want to support my work, you can use this link that I have in the description for a free 7-day trial. And if you choose to subscribe after the 7 days, I'll earn a small commission helping me create more content like this. So today we're going to go over this whiteboard, which I've titled On the Bountiful Life, the Heart of a Giver. This whiteboard and all of the connections were created over about 2 days, which is something I wanted to talk to you about when you are studying something, specifically something that's complicated, complex, that has multiple connections, multiple ways of thinking about something, multiple angles, perspectives, all that stuff. You really want to allow margin, allow time between your study sessions. When I'm studying the Bible, I like to take breaks and come back to a passage maybe a couple days later or the next day, because the time away from whatever it is I'm studying, in that time my brain is making more connections. So on day one, I started off reading through the passage here in 2 Corinthians. This is a book in the Bible, 2 Corinthians 9, chapter 9, verses 6 through 15, on the topic of the cheerful giver. All right. So what I did is I created a card for this passage right here, because this is the source text. This is what I'm going to be studying, is the verses 6 through 15. And so I put that inside of a card and I made it its own color, as you can see on the whiteboard right here. It's the only one that is orange, okay? Because I want this visually to represent this is the source text. This is where it started, okay? And all the connections that came from it. I want to pause just for a moment here and give you a free gift for hanging out with me today. This is a short PDF guide on how to get insights from the nonfiction books that you read and that you love into your PKM system. By the end of this guide, you'll have a simple system for highlighting your books, a mindful approach for adding content to your PKM system or PKM Notes app, a process for creating building blocks of knowledge for the future, and then a simple tip for making more connections between your notes. The link to the free guide is in the description below. One of the translations of the Bible, the English Standard Version, here it includes some related passages, right? So right here it says, the point is this, that's part of the verse. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. That's the verse. But inside here we have some related passages that I can look up, right? So I looked up a few of them, Proverbs 11:24 and 25, and then Proverbs 22, verse 9. And what I did was I created two separate cards for both of these verses. Here's one, and here's the other. And then I actually drew connections using the draw connection feature, and I drew a connection from Proverbs 11:24 through 25 to the source text in 2 Corinthians 9. And I did the same thing for Proverbs 22 verse 9, drawing a connection. And then I made a connection between these two proverbs. So visually I can see they are connected, right? But also inside of the card, if I happen to, later on in my studying, and I happen to come across Proverbs 11:24 and 25, right? Proverbs 11:24 and 25. This is its own individual card. And if I come across it in my card library, or I do a search and this pops up, what I'm going to find is I may be actually looking at this in a different context on a different whiteboard. And what I'm going to see is where this idea also lives and what it's connected to, right? In this metadata down here in the info section. It may look like that for you if you open up a card, but you can click it to show all of the data of when it was created, word count, all that kind of stuff. But the context here is what I'm looking at. I can see exactly where this idea, this, in this case, this proverb lives. And this is a standalone card, and every time that I put this in another whiteboard, it's going to show up down here, right? Right now it's on one whiteboard, on the bountiful life, which is one that we're talking about right now. Now, I was intrigued by Proverbs 22 verses 9. It says, "Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, for he shares his bread with the poor." And the words bountiful eye stood out to me. Now, just real quick, you can actually search inside of a whiteboard by hitting Command P. Command O is going to search everything. Command P, like for example, if I'm zoomed out and I want to look for Proverbs 22, I can actually hit Command P to open this up. And you can see in the text here, it says search this whiteboard. When I do Command O, it changes it to find anything, right? But we want Command P. And if I could just type in the numbers 22, it's going to show me the card, and then also blocks within the card of where Proverbs 22, or at least 22, what I searched for, shows up. When I click it, it's going to zoom me right to the card. Super handy and awesome. Command P to search inside of a whiteboard. Now, as you're studying, you want to be flexible to go down rabbit holes and rabbit trails. My plan originally was to study the cheerful giver, 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 15. But I let go of that plan because I was drawn to something inside of this text that relates to this text, right? So it started with this. It started with the 2 Corinthians 9, but for some reason I was drawn to these words, bountiful eye. And so I decided to follow that curiosity. And often I find that when I follow my curiosity, that's where I discover the gold, the ideas that are meaningful, and maybe meaningful for that moment is more appropriate. Maybe it's just something that I needed to see here in this moment. Now, I looked up the word bountiful here in Hebrew using this site, blueletterbible.com, right? And I wrote down the definition within the Proverbs 22:9 card. This card is its own card, and you can see I've got definitions of a couple of different words here. These are the Hebrew definitions. In this case, bountiful, it means good, kind, or benign, right? Gentle, kindly. Now, the Bible was written in other languages, so sometimes the English translation of that Bible and the version that you have doesn't quite hit the mark. For example, I have two different versions of this verse right here, right, where it's saying the same verse, but it's a little bit different. This is the amplified version where it says, "He who is generous will be blessed." Just the first part of the verse, "Who has a bountiful eye will be blessed." But generous, in my opinion, doesn't quite do this word justice, right? The bountiful eye, I believe, it takes it to another level whenever you consider the words eye and bountiful, meaning good, kind, and benign. So whoever has a good and kind and benign mind, right? The eye is figurative of the mental and spiritual faculties, acts, and states, right? The eye represents what we think, feel, and do, right? So it means whoever has, if I were to replace this definition, whoever has a good, kind, and benign mind and spirit, they will be blessed. So you can see how it's more than just generous, right? You may think of the word generous and you may have something that pops into your mind as you think of that, the word of the definition of generous and what that means to you, but it's different whenever we see it, what the original intent of the word means. Now, this whole process of looking up meanings of words happens for all books for me, right? It started with the Bible because I wanted to know what the original intent of the author was when they wrote the words, right? So, and it's turned into kind of like a study technique for me to look up definitions and synonyms and place those inside of the text that I'm looking at, the idea that I'm trying to think about, the concept that I'm learning about, because it helps me learn and puts it in a different perspective, and it gives me a different angle to look at it from. Now, I noticed in Proverbs 22:9 that had another proverb related to it on this same topic, which was Proverbs 19:17, right here. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. So what I did is, obviously you can see that I created a card and I made the connection. And what I'm doing is I'm making the connection to the source card, right? I'm not drawing a connection from this card to this card, but it's a backlink to the source card. And this Proverbs 22 is a backlink to this source card where it started. Okay, so I can see the trail. I can see the trail here of how this relates to Proverbs. I'm on right now the Cheerful Giver 2 Corinthians data right now, where it's related to Proverbs 22:9. Okay, if I click into that, all right, let me look at the info here. This has quite a few connections, but there's Proverbs 19:17. Okay, let me open up that. There it is. Let's open up this, the metadata right here, and then I have other connections, right? So you can see the path, the thought path, the idea path, whatever you want to call it. It's just so cool. Now, I was observing the three proverbs that we have right here in this triangle. Proverbs 22:9, Proverbs 19:17, and Proverbs 11:24 and 25. And I noticed there was a pattern, right? They all in some way were saying whoever or anyone, right? So for example, whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed. Whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord. One gives freely yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessing will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered. So there's a connection here. Whoever, right? And so I thought anyone who follows the principle of these proverbs is going to receive blessing, whether you follow Jesus or not. The text here is indicating that anyone who follows these principles would receive blessing. So I created a card and colored it blue, indicating that this is a new idea, right? And I drew connections from this card to the proverbs. Now in the metadata, I can see the connections to those proverbs in the context of the whiteboard, right? This is a standalone card. The blessings of generosity are not conditional. Anyone, whoever. So I can come across this card maybe a year from now. And because it was created inside of a whiteboard, I can see the birthplace of the idea, and I can see the connections a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. And it can be built upon. Like I can make more connections in the future. This will continue to grow and expand and have many backlinks. That is a superpower of Heptabase, right? You get context of your ideas. Context is everything. Okay, that was day one, right? I spent maybe an hour or so looking at this card, creating these cards, right? Now day two, sorry about that. Day two landed all the other cards, right? All the other ones that we see here. I came back to this whiteboard and I was looking around at the cards that I had created, and again, I followed my curiosity with this. I was drawn to Proverbs 11:24 and 25. One gives freely, yet grows all the richer. And I started to look up this word freely in Hebrew. And I soon realized that I've created a card for this already. I already have a related card for this text. So I searched for Proverbs 11:24. So if I hit Command 3, it'll open up the sidebar. This is where I can search for other cards to drag onto the whiteboard. All right, so if I search Proverbs 11:24, okay, they are grayed out right now because they are already on the whiteboard. Normally they would not be grayed out. So that's a visual indicator that they're already included on this whiteboard. As you sense familiarity or deja vu, right? Like, I've seen this before. Like, where have I seen this before? You want to search your notes, right? And as you see here in a little bit, this led to finding a handful of related ideas and thoughts. So what happened? I searched Proverbs 11:24, and I found this note, giving in all directions in abundance or lack. Proverbs 11:24. There it is right there in the title. And I dragged it onto the whiteboard. And here it is right here. And then I made the connection from this card to the text. This is the source text of this idea, right? Now I noticed that there were other cards in the search results that were related to this card as well. One of them was build and give in all circumstances, right? It's very similar to give in all directions in abundance or lack. However, this note that I created was from the book 2 Corinthians 8, chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, right? We started with 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 15, and now we are hopping through books. Proverbs is another book, right? And then we have 2 Corinthians 8. This is another chapter of the book, 2 Corinthians. We're hopping through books, and I'm noticing the patterns and the connections between these ideas, between the thoughts. And so I made more connections, right? I connected this card to this card, which connects to this card. I could even make a connection from this card to Proverbs, right? You can use these dots to bend the lines so that they're not on top of other cards if you need to do that, by the way. Now this build and give in all circumstances, this card came from a moment where I was observing ants, right? So I had already created a card called Be Adaptable, Lesson from the Ants. Ants have tunnels underground. When it rains, it floods. So when it rains, it floods the tunnels, so they adapt and build above ground. Every time it rains, they adapt. They don't give up because it floods, right? This is a note that came before this note. But this note inspired this idea when I was reading in 2 Corinthians. Because in this text right here, it's talking about how the churches of Macedonia were in a severe test of affliction. Their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part, right? And so this idea was to build and give in all circumstances, whether I have enough or I don't have enough. And it reminded me of the ants, right? When I was observing the ants, actually, they reminded me of this text. And so I made the connection there. So now we have this is deep and wide thinking right here. This is across many books and also across many topics. We're talking about ants, ants and generosity here. You can learn from anywhere. That is my point. Now, both of these cards here, giving in all directions and build and give in all circumstances, they revealed another card for me, right? Which was this card. Hardship and poverty are not barriers to generosity, which is also related to 2 Corinthians 8. This is another takeaway from the same passage. It's just in a new card because it's a different takeaway, right? And so I made the connections there as well. And here's something else that I want to point out. When you see ideas next to each other, right? Like this can only happen really on a whiteboard when it's all kind of spread out before you. When you see the ideas next to each other, it will bubble up other thoughts, other ideas, right? That's another superpower of Heptabase, and the fact that you can think through and make sense of ideas on a whiteboard and then make the connections. And then the connections stay with the card. And wherever the card goes, you see those connections still. It's awesome. Now, after I made those connections, I went back to Proverbs 22:9. I'm going to hit Command P, and it's already here for me. Proverbs 22:9. All right, here I am. This started the rabbit trail yesterday, or not yesterday, but the first day. And I started looking at the second half of this text. Right, this is the whole proverb right here. Whoever has a bountiful eye will be blessed, comma, for he shares his bread with the poor. That's the second half of this proverb. The first day I was just focused on 2 words, and it led me down a whole different trail. But on the second day, I came back to the proverb, and I looked at, for he shares his bread with the poor. Now, the word shares stood out to me. And as I considered that word in the context of this proverb right here, I made a note. And this note was right here. The sharing, which is the outward expression, reveals the caring, which is the inward heart posture. Right? And you may have immediately thought of sharing is caring, right? Our mom taught us that. Wherever you have heard it. That's what I thought of immediately. But it's so much more than a surface level saying of sharing is caring, right? The idea here is that your heart drives your hand, right? What's going on the inside will determine what you see on the outside. Those who are bountiful, they're full of kindness and goodness and gentleness, which reminded me, this is part of something else, the fruit of the Spirit. And because it reminded me of this other idea of the fruit of the Spirit, I actually searched for fruit of the Spirit in my notes and found this note: go after being fruitful versus being productive. This was a takeaway from a podcast I listened to a while back. Could have been a year and a half ago. But you can see the power here. Hopefully you're seeing it. How some of these notes I took several years ago, and they're bubbling back up. Maybe I've read this passage before, but it doesn't really matter. Like, there's going to be something else that stands out to me. For example, it just happened with this one proverb right here, where on day 1, I was focused on the bountiful eye, and on day 2, he shares his bread. He shares. The word shares stood out to me, which led to more connections, which led to an idea, a way, that I would express it, a new idea, which is why it's colored in blue, which led to another connection, another note. So listen, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that you enjoyed following the rabbit trail with me and going through and how I study. Hope you learned something. Hope you were inspired and challenged to create some ideas of your own and to connect ideas inside of whiteboards, all that kind of stuff. If you have any questions about Heptabase, about visual note-taking, about thinking deep and wide, let me know in the comments. And I look forward to hanging out with you again in the next video.